There's an engine that officially died in 1985, but refused to stay buried. The Holden 202, Australia's most iconic power plant that Americans have never heard of. 202 cubic inches of cast iron simplicity that powered everything from family sedans to race cars, from taxi cabs to police pursuit vehicles, from farm utes to Bathurst champions. Official production span, 1965 to 1985. Actual service life, still running strong in 2025, 40 years after General Motors tried to kill it. This wasn't some high-performance exotic or limited production special. This was a pushrod inline six designed for working-class families, built to survive Australian heat, dust, and distances that would destroy lesser engines. So how did a simple economy engine become so legendary that Australians still rebuild them instead of swapping in modern power plants? How does an engine murdered by corporate accountants get resurrected by national pride and refuse to die even when better alternatives exist? The answer reveals everything about designing for real-world conditions versus spreadsheet projections, about over-engineering for durability versus cost-cutting for quarterly profits. This is the story of the engine that survived its own execution and became more relevant dead than it ever was alive. Historical context and development. The story begins in 1963 when Holden, General Motors' Australian subsidiary, developed its first all-Australian engine family. The red motor they created wasn't licensed from Detroit or adapted from European designs. This was genuine Australian engineering, designed specifically for a continent that destroyed engines through sheer hostility. Consider the Australian context. Vast distances requiring brutal reliability. Perth to Sydney spans 4,000 kilometers. Extreme heat regularly exceeding 45 degrees Celsius, that's 113 Fahrenheit, turning engine bays into blast furnaces. Dust so fine it penetrated seals that European engineers thought were airtight. Poor fuel quality in rural areas where octane ratings were suggestions rather than guarantees. And service infrastructure that disappeared once you left the cities, meaning engines needed to be simple enough for farmers and bush mechanics to repair with basic tools. The original red motor displaced 186 cubic inches in 1963. By 1966, Holden bored it out to 202 cubic inches, 3.3 liters in metric terms, creating the sweet spot for Australian family cars and commercial vehicles. The formula was straightforward: 3.30-inch bore, 3.94-inch stroke, and a 7-bearing crankshaft that was absurdly robust for an inline six. Most sixes made do with 4 main bearings. Holden engineers specified 7, distributing loads so evenly that crankshaft flex became impossible. GMH's engineering philosophy prioritized simplicity and serviceability over sophistication, robust construction for harsh conditions, parts interchangeability across model years, low-tech solutions that actually worked. The 202 was designed to be rebuilt multiple times over a 500,000-kilometer lifespan, not thrown away when it wore out. This wasn't planned obsolescence, this was planned immortality. The Golden Age. The years between 1966 and 1980 saw the 202 become the engine of middle-class Australia. Power output ranged from 115 to 132 horsepower depending on year and emissions equipment, while torque settled around 180 to 186 pound-feet, arriving at 2,400 RPM. These weren't impressive numbers, but they told only part of the story. That low RPM torque curve was perfect for loaded family wagons crawling through urban traffic or towing caravans across the Nullarbor Plain. The 202 powered everything Holden built: the Holden Kingswood family car, the Tirana Compact, 1-ton trucks and utilities. If it wore a Holden badge and wasn't a V8, it probably had a 202 under the hood. Why did Australians love this engine with almost religious devotion? The unbreakable reputation, proven by stories of taxicabs exceeding 800,000 kilometers on original bottom ends. The simplicity: you could rebuild one in a farm shed with hand tools and a workshop manual. Parts availability everywhere, even in outback towns where the nearest Holden dealer was 300 kilometers away. Fuel efficiency delivering 25 to 30 miles per gallon on highway runs when petrol was expensive. The ability to run on low-octane fuel without detonating itself into scrap metal. But the golden moment belonged to Motorsport. Peter Brock's Torana GTR XU1, with its triple carburetor 202, won Bathurst in 1972, proving that six-cylinder reliability could triumph over V8 power when the race went long enough. Modified 202 made over 200 horsepower naturally aspirated, and the engine that powered your grandmother's Kingswood wagon was suddenly a giant killer on racetracks and rally stages. Technical brilliance. The engineering wasn't sophisticated, but it was absolutely correct for the application. That 7-main bearing crankshaft distributed loads so effectively that crankshaft deflection became impossible even under sustained high-load operation. The cast-iron block and head were heavy, but genuinely indestructible. Long skirt pistons reduced cylinder wall wear. Siamese cylinder bores kept the package compact. Conservative valve springs reduced valve train wear to almost nothing. The specifications revealed the philosophy: 3.30-inch bore, 3.94-inch stroke creating 202 cubic inches. Bore spacing of 3.75 inches, connecting rods measuring 6.50 inches, yielding a 1.65 to 1 rod ratio, decent for durability if not performance. Compression ratios between 8.5 to 1 and 9.0 to 1, conservative enough to tolerate poor fuel quality. Overhead valve pushrod architecture with block-mounted camshaft, full pressure oiling system with spin-on filter. Nothing exotic, nothing fragile, nothing that couldn't be serviced with basic tools. Early engines used single Stromberg downdraft carburetors. Mid-production versions featured twin SU side drafts. The Performance GTR XU1 variant ran triple Strombergs that looked spectacular and actually worked. Electronic ignition replaced points in the early 80s, but fuel injection never arrived for passenger car applications. The 202 died before electronic engine management became standard. The aftermarket understood the 202's potential better than Holden did. Cylinder head porting was well understood. Supercharger kits pushed output past 150 horsepower. Stroker kits created 215 and 230 cubic inch variants. Challenges rise. The 1970s brought Australia's emissions crisis. Australian design rule standards strangled power output through compression ratio reductions, lean carburetor calibrations, EGR systems, and air pumps. Horsepower fell from 132 in 1970 to barely 115 by 1980. Drivability suffered. Fuel economy gains were minimal despite significant power losses. The 202 that had been smooth and responsive became sluggish and temperamental. Then came the corporate death sentence. In 1978, General Motors decided to rationalize global operations. Holden received orders to adopt the GM Family 2 four-cylinder engine, a 1.9-liter unit designed in Europe for compact cars. Detroit accountants deemed the 202 obsolete despite its popularity and profitability. Australian engineers argued passionately for keeping the 202. Corporate directives overruled local knowledge. The decision was final. Phase out the 202 by 1985. The 1986 VL Commodore delivered the final insult. Holden's first Commodore without a Holden-designed engine. The Nissan RB30E6 was objectively adequate, actually superior in most measurable ways, but it wasn't Australian. Sales declined despite the better engine. National pride was wounded. Not a real Holden anymore became the common complaint. But the 202 refused to die completely. Industrial applications kept it alive. Forklift manufacturers continued production. Marine applications needed it. Agricultural equipment and irrigation pumps required it. Generator sets for remote locations demanded it. GMH quietly continued industrial 202 production long after 1985, eventually extending into the 2000s. The transition. The last passenger car 202 rolled off the line in 1985 in a Holden WB utility. Official automotive production ceased. Industrial production continued in shadows. GMH sold tooling rights to aftermarket companies. Australian engine builders stockpiled components like they were hoarding gold, because in many ways, they were. Then something unexpected happened. The 2002 became more popular dead than it had been in its final years alive. The 1990s witnessed an enthusiast backlash against imported engines. A Keep It Holden movement emerged among restorers who refused to let corporate stupidity erase Australian engineering heritage. Specialty shops focused exclusively on 202 rebuilds. Performance parts development actually accelerated after production ended. Stroker kits, EFI conversion systems, and turbo kits appeared from aftermarket suppliers who recognized the business opportunity GM had abandoned. Modern conversions transformed the 202 from carburetor relic to fuel-injected performer. EFI systems using Holden V8, ECUS, or aftermarket standalone units delivered 150 to 180 horsepower, with reliability exceeding original specifications and fuel economy surpassing the carburetor versions. Holden moved to Buick-derived 3.8-liter V6 engines, more powerful, more efficient, more modern, but heavier, more complex, and ultimately less durable over the long term. Australian mechanics missed the simplicity. The V6 couldn't match the 202's legendary longevity, and enthusiasts knew it. And when industrial production finally ceased, the aftermarket stepped in completely. Today, parts availability is better than it was in the 1990s. Aftermarket support is stronger than for many current production engines. Thousands of 202s still run in classic Holdens. Legacy and modern reality. The Holden 202 occupies a strange space in automotive history, officially extinct yet functionally immortal. Thousands remain in daily service across Australia, powering restored classics and stubborn holdouts who refuse to accept that better alternatives exist. Rebuilt 202 engines fetch $3,000 to $5,000, and finding quality cores requires patience and connections. But the most remarkable aspect is the rebuild culture that refuses to fade. Hundreds of specialists operate across Australia, entire businesses existing solely to support an engine that's been dead for 40 years. Young mechanics learn 202 rebuilds from retired experts, ensuring knowledge transmission continues. This isn't nostalgia. It's practical engineering education. Modern 202 builds achieve 180 to 220 horsepower, naturally aspirated with proper cylinder headwork and engine management. Turbocharged examples push past 300 horsepower while maintaining street reliability. EFI conversions improve drivability dramatically while delivering 30 to 35 miles per gallon highway, better than the original carburetor versions ever managed. Parts availability better than many 1990s engines. National pride demanding Australian engine in Australian car. Cost effectiveness. Rebuilding a 202 costs less than swapping a modern engine. And character. That smooth, torquey delivery sounds right in a classic Holden. The cultural significance transcends mechanical merit. The 202 symbolizes Australian automotive independence, representing an era before globalization killed local engineering. It's featured in Australian films and television. Books and documentaries examine its impact. Museums display cutaway examples. This is more than an engine. It's a cultural artifact of Australian identity. So how does an engine survive 40 years after corporate execution? by being so good that a nation refused to let it die. What's your take on the immortal 202? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe, because sometimes the best engines are the ones that refuse to quit.